Okay, welcome back to the 184th meeting of the Acoustical Society of America. Next up, we're going to hear from Yolanda Holt, who is from East Carolina University, and she's going to explain the differences between African American English and White American English and why that's important. So, Yolanda.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ashley, for the lovely introduction. My name is Yolanda Holt. I'm an associate professor in communication sciences and disorders from East Carolina University in lovely North Carolina. So first, what is African American English? African American English is a variety of English, a complete language, primarily spoken by people of historical African descent, that is, Black Americans who are historically African. But what is linguistic justice? For our discussion today, we're going to use this working definition. Linguistic justice is the idea that an individual's learning and development will occur in the cultural language practices of their family and community. And no one language is better than another. Further, African American English is a whole language, meaning it's a complete language. That means it has a vocabulary, a sound system, a sentence structure, methods and rules for communicating ideas and storytelling that are internally consistent and shared from one generation to the next, parent to child. And while African American English is complete and unique and whole, it is for the most part mutually intelligible with other varieties of North American English. If we were to complete a literature review of academic research that's been completed on AAE, we would likely find a long list of features. Those features are the general rules of the language. The features, or rules, illustrate examples of what is allowed in the grammar. And as you'll see on the next slide, some of those rules vary or even conflict with the rules of white or standard American English. So on the left, you see the African American English feature or rule. In the middle, you have an African American English production, which I'll provide for you, and then a white American English variation. So the first example is invariant be use, which is a habitual state of action, something that happens all the time. The African American English production might be, they be yelling. White American English variation, they yell all the time. Remote past been, something that happened a long time ago as opposed to the recent past. They been left. They left a long time ago, the White American English variant. Zero past tense, meaning the ending sound is zeroed out. She walked fast. And here I have the example for you, she walked fast, where the ending sound is zeroed out. Zero plural, again, the ending sound that would mark plural is zeroed out. We have two dog, we have two dogs. And here, specific to our talk today, final consonant deletion, which is devoicing or a different articulation of the final consonant. Did the cat move? Did the cat move? And final consonant cluster reduction, where we have a word like we kept quiet, or we kept quiet as opposed to we kept quiet. It's important to remember that as African American English is a complete language, it is possible to tell everything from the most efficient method to trim the lawn to the current status of machine learning and artificial intelligence and its effect on world job markets in tech and financial services using only African American English. So if it's complete, and it's whole, and it's passed from parent to child, generation to generation, and we have much research on African American English, what's the problem? The problem is the deficit perspective regarding African American English, particularly today we're talking about from the research community. We think about African American English and we talk about the deficits in the use of the language and by implication, the community of speakers that use the language. Males in urban schools, the family, literacy, and discipline are areas that come up. So African American English in the communities are sometimes promoted in a deficit way across research disciplines. So what's the solution? Well, actually the solution has been proposed as long ago as 1982 by Stockman and Von Cook, and then 30 years later again by Stockman in 2010, that we should develop a new set of research questions that allow us to think about African American English as what it is, a way for children and people to communicate with each other that has typical language patterns of development. We should focus on the development of African American English, not in comparison specifically to white American English development, but understand that as the two co-occur and coexist, that they're simply variations on a theme, the language of communication between the people. Focus on the meaning of use of children's language in African American English as well as the linguistic forms, and then be sensitive to the socio-linguistic cultural aspects of the language. And then what our lab is doing is translating that research to functional, usable strategies for the practitioners. I'm going to share with you an example of what African American English use sounds like from the perspective of a 5-year-old child.
Elephant.
And a white American English speaking child.
Elephant.
You might notice that you both understood the word elephant in the two examples. This is acoustic phonetic picture on the bottom and a waveform at the top that shows to the trained eye the differences between the production. The African American child, English speaking child, uses a smaller piece of sound to produce the elephant, and then the white American English speaking child has a bigger piece, but they both said elephant. Here are some references to share, and I would like to thank you for your time and attention, and please reach out for more information. We hope you can attend our talk that's coming up on tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Yolanda. I'll start with a question. So I'm curious, when you're talking about like diagnosing speech disorder in children, what role does kind of accounting for these differences play in that?
So if we understand that African American English is a complete system and that a person who acquires African American English who's typically developing is going to have a complete sound system, when we only compare African American English speakers to white American English speakers without accounting for that internal variation, then we are more likely to diagnose a difference as a disorder. And that's what this research is attempting to do, to provide some examples of when the two children produce the same target, how is it the same and how is it different? If we use our ears and we're attuned to listening to the African American English speaking child, we become attuned to understanding this variation is not a disorder, it's simply a difference.
Okay. Do we have some questions from the room?
I have a very nerdy question
Sure.
about the cat example of cat
Cat?
versus the T getting dropped. Is the T dropped in AAE compared to WAE, or is it more like the glottal, or is it guttural stop, like the
It's
stop?
a glottal,
Glottal
G-L-O-T-T-A-L, glottal stop, and that's an excellent question. And one of the reasons that I gave you the example where you're listening versus the example where you can see the difference. And so where you can see the difference, and I gave the example that the white American English speaking child had a bigger chunk of sound that we could see, and the African American English speaking child had a smaller chunk of sound. If your ear is tuned to listening for that big chunk and you don't hear that big chunk, you might say that it's not there. You can use a glottal stop. There's also something called final consonant release, where if I say the word cat, cat versus cat, cat versus cat, just by not releasing when I produce the t sound, you don't hear. You have an expectation, but maybe you don't hear it. And so that's an excellent question. Thank you so much.
Could I have one follow-up on that? So
When you answer, there you go.
you just said the release. Is that also an aspiration? I ask because when I'm learning Hindi, aspirations, right? Like I'm very bad at stopping my T's and my D's or making that aspiration, and it really is a hearing, whether I haven't been trained, right? to
So
hear
Hindi
that.
has a three-way stop. They have both unreleased, aspirate, and unaspirated. So they have three-way difference that's phonetic. It matters to the language.
So released is different from aspirated entirely then?
You can be released and unaspirated. You can be released and aspirated.
Okay.
You can have many of the things. And so what you're listening for in your language form is what you're saying is right or wrong.
Okay.
Thank you so much. We have 2 questions from the live stream participants. One is from Rick Lovett, and he's asking, are there practical uses for this in addition to avoiding misdiagnosing non-existent speech disorders?
What would be awesome is if we would actually gather this data so that as we develop AI systems that will be used in public schools, in hospitals, and in all the other places that we exist, that those systems accurately hear what an African American speaker is saying as well as what a white American English speaker is saying. Because if we're using the tools and the way they're designed to make work smarter, not harder, they will be used for things like miscue analysis in public education. And I would hate for an African American English speaking child to be diagnosed with a reading disorder when they have a difference in pronunciation.
Great answer and inspiring. Hopefully that's what happens. The next question is from Maura Shapiro, and she's asking, what recommendations do you have for teachers who would like to teach AAE, keeping in mind the socioeconomic context of the language?
So I'm going to direct you to a paper by Ramonda Horton-Eichard. It's not just the poor kids, because African American English is used by people, not just people from certain socioeconomic statuses. The thing that I would encourage you to do is, if you're a person who is a communication scientist or specialist, that you actually acquire data from your community of practice by inviting African American kids across the socioeconomic spectrum in to participate and do a Goldman-Fristow and do a comparison of what the African American kids do across the SES with what white American kids do across SES. You're also going to find variation based on your regional location. And be careful about things. So we wouldn't say kids that have pool, pull, and pole, all pronounced as pool, would have difficulty acquiring literacy. So why would we imply that children who have variant production, African American English speaking children, will have difficulty with literacy? Because they're communicating. There's literature written in African American English, Zora Neale Hurston. There are plenty of examples of this across. And we just encourage the removal of the deficit perspective and moving towards a true contrastive analysis where the adults are contrasting what they hear, because the language exists, it's beautiful, it's useful. Peace out.
Well, thank you, Yolanda, and we'll be back in one moment with our last presenter for this morning.